Check 1, 2, check 1, 2. Good morning. Cheers. What's happening, everybody? Thank you so much for tuning in to the Unknown Packers podcast. If you haven't yet, check out my last episode last week. It's titled 11622, and it really goes into detail about my day-to-day struggles, my life, why I needed to take a break back in November, and this new approach moving forward. Just a little bit of a recap. I wasn't planning on ever recording again. It, I needed a break, and it felt good. And part of having mental health issues and struggles is that acceptance piece. And I'm going to talk a little bit about acceptance in terms of being a Green Bay Packers fan and what we all witnessed over the weekend and what we can do moving forward. And it's tough to talk about these sorts of things because I don't want to come off as this holier than thou enlightened being. That's not how I want to come across. And so I'm working at trying to articulate these concepts because it's so easy to just be like, accept things, move forward, be in the moment, namaste, all this stuff. And a lot of times I feel like we get carried away from the present moment and we're more intrigued about how smart we sound, how enlightened we are. And I'm using air quotes. But if you haven't yet, check out last week's episode. And I apologize beforehand. The audio is awful. I recorded it live on YouTube. And then I don't have the editing and publishing prowess or the resources that we had once before. So recording this episode on YouTube live. And last week I mentioned, we'll see. I didn't put any sort of expectation on another episode. I didn't. But here we are, another week. And I'm going to be working on the audio issues. There's a reason why I had to shut down the initial live because I didn't have my microphone or webcam set up. And I want the episode to sound a little bit better. I know last week I talked about how I'm just going to press record and just talk and just see how the episode turns out. And after listening to it, there are definitely moments where it's clippy, it's loud, there's no breaks. There's long pauses when I went to the bathroom here on YouTube Live that I'm sure anyone that was listening to on Spotify or Apple or any app that you listen to with podcasts that you're probably like, oh, what's going on? So I'll do a better job of editing these episodes moving forward. And again, it's that one day at a time mentality of my hope is to continue to do this moving forward. With that said, check out the episode last week. I go into detail about my anxiety, my depression, my bouts with suicidal ideations, and all of that. And I'm going to tap into that a little bit later on in the episode because there's something that I want to talk about in parallel with a certain Packers player. And not that this Packers player is had suicidal ideations, but there's an interesting backstory to the specific player and his father. And it sort of reminded me of my relationship with my father. And that's why I'm here. I mean, I'm here because of my father. I'm a Packers fan because of my father. Anxiety and depression because of my father. And now, like, I've come to terms with, rather than blaming him, it's up to me now to accept my childhood, to accept my mental health, to accept my actions, and how do I move forward? How do I, rather than point the finger and blame, how do I accept things and move forward? So that's how I want to sort of massage it, is talk about it a little bit. And I hope I don't come off as someone that like has all the answers, because I don't. But speaking of last week's episode, I literally just got on YouTube Live almost spur of the moment. I had been thinking about doing an episode talking about what had happened when we took a break with the Unknown Packers podcast, and I, I didn't expect the episode to do well. And I'm really, really humbled and grateful for all the fans and supporters of the Unknown Packers podcast. I had so many messages, so many text messages, and messages I mean like on Twitter, um, and text messages from people that I know, people that I don't know, that talked about how much the episode helped them. And that was my whole point, was one, to be cathartic with myself and talk things through. And it felt good afterwards. It felt like there was a weight off my shoulders, but it was also to help others and be of service to others and support others and realize that it's okay to not be okay. And that it takes a village, and we're all in this together. So when that episode released, and I got bombarded from a lot of people thanking me and appreciating me being candid and open, and raw and honest. And so that meant a lot. I literally had no expectations of the episode. I just wanted to come on and talk about things that were going on and see if someone connected to it. And it clearly did. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for everyone that sent really kind messages, checking in, also saying that for some people, they didn't realize that they were struggling with things in this episode that I recorded last week, allowed them to realize that it was okay. So that's the intent. I want this episode, I want this podcast to really talk about mental health, talk about current affairs in that situation, and then also it revolve around the Green Bay Packers. And speaking of, in terms of the Green Bay Packers, but again, thank you so much for everyone reaching out. It's a double-edged sword when you get honest and raw, especially out in the open, uh, because if you don't respond uh, efficiently, people start to wonder, like, oh, is he okay? Is he thinking about suicide again? Is he depressed? And I didn't realize that that's sort of the reaction, because of my action of being honest. And so that's something that I'm going to continue to grapple with, is that by being open with people, by being honest about what's going on, I've realized that some people worry then if I don't respond. And they start wondering, oh, is Brice okay? And again, I, today's a good day. There are bad days. And I've really honed in on when those bad days happen, rather than just sort of ignoring it and pushing through, trying to tap in and see what's going on. And a lot of times it's just rest. And sometimes I'm not able to, but then it's really one of those things where if I find time to rest, then it's what I do. I unplug with the phone, TV, rest, usually go for walks with my dog, with my wife. And that's something that I never did before. And that's, again, the um, recognizing my own anxiety and depression, but also accepting it. And I always ignored the fact or denied the fact that it was almost like this pride factor of like, I survived my childhood and I'm okay. And this is like a badge of honor. And it wore on me, and it obviously turned into alcohol abuse and other things, and just not being present. And but one of the biggest rewards that I've ever had is this acceptance piece of accepting that I have this, and setting up boundaries, and that's interacting with people, and setting up boundaries within myself, saying no, trying to find ways where work works with me. And luckily, I'm an entrepreneur. I run two businesses, so I'm able to sort of move my schedule around sometimes, depending on my mood and the state of my mental health. And so this acceptance piece has really been a huge burden off of me. I thought that that would be the biggest thing, but it's once you accept and you realize, okay, this is what I'm dealing with, you can sort of move forward and proceed. Hold And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today a little bit. One, about obviously, and that's what the episode and the podcast will revolve around, is mental health, and how it's not this whole toxic masculinity. And I know that word gets thrown around, but I'm offended by the fact that by me being in touch with my feelings, and using those in quotations, my emotions, and being empathetic, listening, being open, being present, I feel like that's masculine. And I feel like for the longest time, growing up, it was like, you can't talk about your feelings, you can't be sensitive. And that's how I got into my biggest struggle, was that I wanted to be who I wanted to be. And so this whole, like, um, I guess the definition of being a man, so to speak, like for me, I'm I'm so proud of the fact that I was able to get the help that I needed, and my current mindset and what I'm doing in life, and it being a daily practice. I I wouldn't have it any other way, and that's sort of the life I want to live and lead. And I hope it helps others, that it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to be in touch with your feelings. I never understood why that was such a taboo thing for men. So wanted to highlight that a little bit. And so moving on to this acceptance speech, or acceptance topic. And good morning to everyone as well. And thank you all for joining. But in terms of acceptance, I talked about being comfortable in your own skin and accepting who you are, and how you sort of can navigate the world. Um, that ties into the Green Bay Packers and what we all witnessed this past weekend. The divisional round loss to the San Francisco 49ers. And I'll be honest, I was a little nervous about the matchup with the Niners. I felt like they were the hottest team. And I know that there are some out there that said, oh, the Green Bay Packers had the number one seed. They were the best team in the NFL, home field advantage at Lambeau Field, yada, 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 all that stuff. But um, the Packers, when you look back in history, have always lost to the hottest team. And again, the Super Bowl winner is always the hottest team, usually, who gets hot and who can sort of maintain that momentum. And right now, what we witnessed again was the fact that the San Francisco 49ers are the hottest team in the NFL, and we witnessed that. I think I would have been a little bit more okay with the fact if the Niners came in and just completely manhandled us or embarrassed, like that momentum. So, like, we struggled, but it is a tough pill to swallow that we gave that game up. You can easily blame the special teams, which I think deservedly so. The missed field goal, the blocking unit, the blocked punt in the blocking unit in that, the protection. And then also the last field goal with Robbie Gould and the Niners, where they only had, like, what, I think they were missing one or two players on the field. Wow. And moving forward, I don't want this. I'm not in the market to just bash humans and bash the team and scream and yell and all that sort of thing. I'm not in the market for that. But I do want to break down the game a little bit and talk about it. And we kind of always knew that the special teams was our weakest phase of our entire team, or our weakest branch. And it came back to bite us in the worst fashion, too. So you can easily point the finger on, if the special team doesn't give away 10 points, we advance. And again, this acceptance thing of accepting the fact, of accepting the results, accepting that the Packers were eliminated and moving forward. I used to, in the past, losses, I would dwell on them for weeks, especially like a season-ending loss. I would dwell on them for weeks. It became my identity. And my identity became, if I, like, the biggest Packers fan. and the most rowdiest, loudest, and obnoxious, to be honest. That was my identity. I was proud of the fact that I was so in love with the Green Bay Packers and so committed to them that I would bleed. I would um, I would mourn the season-ending loss. One moment in particular is actually I think it's like 24 years to the date. Yesterday was Super Bowl 32, the loss to the Denver Broncos, where we were like 14-point favorites, and everyone thought that we were going to go back to back and win it. And John Elway and the helicopter play and Terrell Davis and I my parents were getting a divorce, or they were already separating, getting divorced, and I watched the game by myself. It's still pretty vivid, and I was a very emotional kid in middle school, and especially right when my parents got divorced. Even though like I grew up getting abused, like when my parents got divorced, like I was like, oh, my life is fracturing. I didn't know what was my life going to be like, and that's so sad to think about that. Like as someone that was getting perpetually abused, that he wanted to keep it the same. And I'm glad that my mom had the courage to leave my father, and we started a new life. But this particular game, the Packers lose. So Terrell Davis scores a touchdown right at the end. I think there was like a minute or something left. I can't remember. And then Favre had the ball, and I just remember fourth down incomplete pass, and the Broncos ended up winning the Super Bowl. And I was so livid that I went into my kitchen, or my mom's kitchen, and I started throwing chairs. And my mom, my mom being deaf, using sign language, was like, get out of the house. And as I was walking around, I grew up in Appleton, Fox Cities, which is like 45 minutes south of Green Bay for those that are unaware of Wisconsin. But I walked around this little like, I don't know, it's like a 10-15 block radius that I walked around, and I had my Packers gear on, and any car that sort of passed, I sort of like shook my head and I kind of threw my hands up, and I wanted this attention. I wanted attention, so to speak. I wanted attention that the Packers lost, and I wanted people to like sort of know that I was the biggest Packers fan. And I thought about how I reacted in 8th grade compared to how the 2015 NFC Championship game, the collapse with the Seattle Seahawks, and how demoralized I was. I mean, that was the last time that like days where I felt awful and just was moody, was awful to everyone that I interacted with, because that was my identity, being the biggest biggest Packer fan, and mourning that loss and being upset and dwelling about that loss. And then I tie it into this last Saturday. And this loss stung. It was disappointing. But it goes back to that acceptance topic that I've been talking about for the last 20 minutes. And I couldn't be prouder of the fact how I responded. Yeah, I was bummed. I was disappointed, but nothing compared to like who I was when I was in 8th grade, or nothing compared to when the Packers lost in the NFC Championship game in 2015. And I started thinking about that, about all this growth and all this change, and again, like, it's tough to talk about like these proud moments because it does sound a little arrogant, like I'm proud of this. But after the Packers lost to the Niners, I watched the highlights, watched the interviews, and accepted the fact that the Packers lost. Do I think that they're the better team than the Niners? Yes. But there are a lot of factors that I felt like went into it. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about my backstory and where I came from as a Packers fan to where I'm at now. And I saw these videos of people recording others, like one person like kicking a door and getting his foot stuck, or one person throwing a bunch of bottles, screaming swear words. And that was me when I was in middle school. That was me in my early 20s. And I think about all this change that I've had and accepting where I'm at now. And granted, I had those struggles when I was younger. I think I masked those struggles in my adoration and dedication and somewhat maniacal obsession with the Green Bay Packers. So seeing these videos, I just thought about like accepting what happened, and how can we move forward. Um, and I have moved forward with the loss, and I'm sure that there are some that haven't, and I hope that there are a lot of others that have. Life is way too short to be wrapped up in a football game, and I keep thinking about players and coaches that this is their livelihood, this is their job, putting it all out there, and how do they feel? And thinking about how easy it is to think about how we feel, and like how dare the Packers lose, or they should have done this. Like Matt LaFleur should have fired Mo Drayton, and all these different things of just attacking. And that's what I want to focus on, is accepting the fact that I feel that the Packers were the better team, and the outcome just didn't result in our favor. And moving forward. And now there's all this talk about what are the Packers going to do with the salary cap? Is Aaron Rodgers going to be here? What's going to happen with Devonta Adams and all this stuff? And again, I go back to this accepting what has happened, and just accepting the moment right now. Like today is Wednesday, I'm recording Wednesday, and what is going on right now? Are you present with your friends? Are you present with your family? Are you present with yourself? And it's so, you go on Twitter and you look at, and I used to do this, and I'm not shaming or looking down upon people. I just all this energy that goes into responding to tweets and sharing what people's ideas and thoughts and all this stuff. Like, what's the point? The Packers are going to do what they do. They've got a great coach. They've got a great general manager, Russ Ball, executive vice president and director of football operations. They are going to assemble the best possible team that they can. And I'm ecstatic that we have Coach LaFleur, and we have general manager Brian Gutekunst, and we have executive vice president, director of football operations, Russ Ball. And I'm just going to trust the process and accept the fact that, yes, we can't get over the hump. And Coach LaFleur talked about that, like getting over the hump and having the most wins in a 3-year period and no Super Bowl appearances. That stings. But listening to Coach LaFleur's press conference and talking about how he's going to be relentless in getting over that hump, I feel good about the future. Whether that is with Aaron Rodgers and Devonta Adams and many others, we'll see. But at least for me, I'm not going to waste my time sort of prognosticating or wondering how the Packers are going to move mountains with the salary cap. From what I read, the Packers are $50 million over the salary cap. And when Ken Engels and I were co-hosting, he talked about how, and he's salary cap guru expert, and a great follow on the state of affairs when it comes to the salary cap, and talking about how the Packers went all in 2020, 2021. I'm getting these years screwed up. And then all in again in 2021, 2022. They brought the band back together to go and win the Super Bowl. So I can't imagine how Gutekunst and Ball and LaFleur feel, and all the other coaches, how they feel, because they brought the band back together. They pushed all this money out to get the Lombardi Trophy, and they came up short. So that's what I'm sort of focusing on, is how are they feeling? I mean, this is their job, their livelihood. They put everything into this season, and man, they had a great team. Great team. There's definitely some head scratchers on how things sort of went awry, especially after that Mercedes Lewis fumble in the first quarter. I mean, to see that defense Like, we've wanted a defense for so long, and now we have it. I'm excited to see where this defense goes. If there is a concern that I'm getting ahead of myself, is I hope the focal point is refortifying or strengthening this defense. I think moving forward, it's definitely going to be a new look team. There are so many players that are on expiring contracts. There's going to be a lot of restructuring. There are be players that are cut, players possibly traded. I'm not going to talk about that on this episode. I'm not going to talk about Aaron Rodgers and where he's going to go or anything like that. I'm not going to talk about that. But in terms of a new era and accepting the fact that one era has closed, whether or not whoever's at quarterback, that remains to be seen. But this new era moving forward, if what I think happens is that I think the Packers become more of a defensive labeled team. Like their identity is the defense, and the defense influences the offense. And for the last 30 years, having Favre and Rodgers, and as much as it stings that we didn't get another Super Bowl, it is what it is. It is what it is. The sun rises, the sun sets, life goes on. We should all do the same. But I think what excites me is the possibility of this new identity, this new era. And if things sort of transpire the way that I've internally think that they're going to, and I'll keep that close to myself because there are things that I just don't want to share, especially with my work in professional sports, and I want to remain professional in that regard. I think about this new era of the Green Bay Packers, and I think we're definitely going to see a new era in the terms of, I think it's going to be more of a defensive-minded team. I think what Joe Barry has done is incredible. Rashawn Gary is an absolute superstar. Again, that's why I go back to like all these people bashing people and criticizing draft picks and all that stuff. You look at Davante Adams and how he was ridiculed his first 2 years and how he should be cut, and look at him now. Arguably top 2 greatest wide receivers of all time. I think Don Hudson is the greatest wide receiver, and then I think Davante Adams is 2. If Davante Adams comes back, he might be the greatest Packers receiver of all time. He's definitely inching closer and closer to Donald Driver's records of receptions and yards. I'm excited about the future because, and I talk about being present, but looking forward, I'm excited because look what Gutekunst has done. I mean, you've got a legit superstar in Rashawn Gary, pairing him up with another superstar in Kenny Clark. Yes, you're going to have to do some sort of assembling with that defensive line and that linebacker core. You potentially have an elite secondary, depending on if you bring Rasul Douglas back. But Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, I think Darnell Savage continues to ascend. He's still a young player. This whole draft and develop approach, you've got to let it process. And you're seeing that with Rashawn Gary. And everyone that criticized that pick, and granted, I'll be completely honest, I was rooting for Brian Burns to be picked, but seeing what Rashawn Gary is doing is it puts a smile on my face. I'm excited to see what he does moving forward. The MVP of that game, the divisional round against the Niners, was Rashawn Gary, just a wrecking ball, and just seeing his growth and development. And that was what draft pundits and even Gutekunst came out and said, like, he's raw. It's going to take some time to develop, but he's got all the tools and intangibles to be a menace. And so you're starting to see that. So I'm getting excited about all these other players. A.J. Dillon, another one where, man, if he doesn't break his rib, what happens? Do they score a touchdown instead of settling for a field goal? And I feel for him because I know that reading some reports that he was absolutely devastated that he couldn't return. But A.J. Dillon and the Aaron Jones compliment the running duo. Again, I think this is going to be if I were have to predict, it's going to be a new team this fall that is focused more on the run, and it stems from the run, and it's a defensive unit. It's identity. Like when when teams come to play the Green Bay Packers, they're going to be worried about this defense. It's been a long time since we've had that. And that's something I'm really excited about. There are a lot of unknowns in terms of Devondre Campbell. Will he come back? I saw a report, maybe like a 2-year, $13 million deal, bringing him back. Rasul Douglas mentioned that it's not going to take much for him to come back, just a little bit something more. He wants to stay in Green Bay. If I were to predict, those are the two players that I'd like back, Devondre Campbell and Rasul Douglas. Keep this defensive unit as cohesive as possible, as same. If you're going to bring back the band, bring back the defense and try to refortify it in the draft in terms of another D lineman, an edge rusher. But you're starting to see why the inside linebacker position is so essential, because we haven't had that. And Devondre Campbell being an All-Pro, I mean, it's an All-Pro it's ridiculous what he was doing. Sideline to sideline, eating plays up. I would love for him to come back. And also just the duo with him and Chris Barnes. I really like Chris Barnes a lot, being undrafted free agent out of UCLA. He went to the same high school as Jordan Love. But I like what Chris Barnes brings to the table. He's got some pop. He had a hit on Elijah Mitchell that just stopped him in his tracks. I'd love to see that duo again, Campbell and Barnes. But in terms of acceptance, I hope everyone can accept the loss. As disappointed as we are, we weren't expecting it, but it is what it is. And I'm looking forward to this new season moving forward. You've got the Senior Bowl coming up. You've got the NFL Combine. You've got the new league starting in March. And from what Rodgers has said, that he'll make his decision before then, but he also wants to see what happens with Devontae Adams. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm excited to just see, again, I sound like a broken record, but what happens moving forward. I'm really excited to see what kind of team the Packers roll out in the 2022-23 season. I'm going to look at my phone real quick because there are some things that I wanted to jot down, or things that I wanted to mention real quick. And I wrote this down, and this is the last thing I'm going to talk about acceptance, but that's the topic of this week's episode. And every week I'm going to have a topic that I talk about that ties in mental health, that ties in my life, and then ties in with the Green Bay Packers. But here's what I wrote right after the Packers lost. Acceptance is a skill and is like anything else. It gets better or worse depending on how much you practice it. I talked about how the Packers lost Super Bowl 32 and I threw a temper tantrum. And all I wanted was some attention. I used to pride myself on how angry and pissed I would get during games and after games. It was my identity as a Packers fan. A Packers fan was my identity. I mentioned in earlier episodes how much I missed being reckless, like a reckless fan, how much I missed that. But after Saturday's loss, I'm glad I'm at where I'm at. Sure I am, and sure I was and am disappointed. I feel like a window has closed and a new era begins. Not sure if it's with Jordan Love or an era of the Packers continuing to be okay with Aaron Rodgers. This team will be different, but is that a bad thing? I tell you what I'm excited about is Brian Gutekunst's draft and develop approach continuing to manifest itself now moving forward. We were always known as a quarterback team. Does that change? Whether we want to accept things or not, life goes on. The Packers will look towards a new season starting in March, a new draft class, a new training camp, a new preseason, and then a new season in August and September. Acceptance is a funny thing. It can be really easy, yet it can be the hardest fucking thing to do. And as we wrap up this live episode, and as this episode will be released on Spotify and Apple and anywhere else that you tune in, it'll also be available in American Sign Language. for our deaf sports fans. But I wanted to wrap up on a couple of things before we bid adieu for this week, and talk about Jordan Love and this whole draft and develop approach. We chastised and we ridiculed Devontae Adams, and look how that turned out. We ridiculed the draft pick of Rashawn Gary. Look how that's turning out. And I'm seeing a lot of murmurs, chatter about we haven't seen anything from Jordan Love, and the Packers. And if Jordan Love is the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers this upcoming season, we're all doomed. All that stuff. And I just, again, we don't know. He'll enter his third year. And I look at this team and we have the pieces. This whole rebuild in quotations, we're not starting from scratch. We've got some really great pieces. But in terms of Jordan Love, I'm excited to see what he can do. I'm rooting for him. And a lot of it is because there are a lot of things that for how he can interview, how he proceeds, how he puts one step forward, it's admirable. I respect the hell out of it. And given his background, this guy was not highly recruited or touted coming out of high school. He went to Utah State. That was his only D1 offer. He had a great junior year. Senior year struggled with a new coach in Gary Anderson, the ex-Wisconsin Badgers coach. He's always struggled with accuracy. That's his biggest thing, and we've seen that in games. But I think another offseason, another training camp preseason with LaFleur, and I'm hopeful. But one thing that I gravitated towards with Jordan Love, there are many things that I've gravitated towards with Jordan Love. One being that I felt like it's just silly, unnecessary that all these people are ridiculing him, are bashing him, and just give him a chance. Give him a chance. But I love his backstory. It's devastating, but where he's come from, and I wanted to wrap up this episode talking about it, is that when he was in middle school, I think he was in 8th grade, his dad committed suicide. And I was reading up on it, and his mom goes to all the games. His mom has never missed a game. If you remember in that Kansas City Packers game where Rodgers was out and Love got the start, where they had his mom and his girlfriend all the way up in the nosebleeds. Talk about just taking care of people, but his mom has been to every game. I love that relationship. And me being a mama's boy and being proud of that. It's been me and my mom forever. And so another thing that I gravitate towards is his relationship with his mother, and his mother just being his number one fan and supporter and not missing a game. I love that. But what I read is that Jordan's dad, and if I'm incorrect, I apologize. But from what I read was that it was some medication that he was on, that he was taking, that had a side effect. And unfortunately, the side effect was suicidal ideations. And that's all I know. And that's all I'm going to talk about because it's such a sensitive topic. It's a private topic, but it's another reason why I want to root for this kid. Having this awful thing happen, and then navigating high school and then college, and now him being in the pros, I'm sure his father would be proud of what Jordan's accomplished. And I just hope that we're just scratching the surface of Jordan Love and his legacy continues and he shines. But I wanted to share a story of almost going full circle with my dad. And when my parents got separated, and for those that are tuning in that don't know, both my parents are deaf. I'm a sign language interpreter. A lot of my work now is in professional sports. I do a lot of consulting behind the teams, making sure that sports teams are accessible and sort of ushering in this new era of fan engagement, making it more inclusive than ever before. And I'm also the sign language interpreter for the Milwaukee Bucks. We made history by becoming the first professional sports team to provide sign language interpreting. The Bucks play the Cavaliers tonight. I'll be doing all the post games afterwards. You can check that out at bucks.com, as well as on Bucks Twitter. You'll see Coach Bud's press conference and my work interpreting for all that. Anyway, I with my and so a lot of the what I'm doing now is because I grew up interpreting for my father at sporting events, specifically at Lambeau Field. And last week I talked about um, my dad, how he became a Packers fan is because Marv Fleming and other players befriended him when my dad would seek refuge at City Stadium during practices, and he became an extension of those Packer practices, and he taught these players sign language, and they looked at him as not less than what he was missing, anything like that, being impaired. I hate that word, um, and they welcomed him in. And little did they know that it completely changed his life and it changed my life. I became a Packers fan because of my father, and we attended games at Lambeau Field, um, and I interpreted for him. And that's how I fast forward 25, 30 years later. I created play by play sports interpreting and I proposed that to the Milwaukee Bucks. But going back to the parallel with Jordan Love and his father, and my dad, is that in eighth grade, when I found out that my mom was going to leave my dad, and this was, I mean, I was getting psychologically abused. I was getting physically abused on a regular basis. And I knew what my dad was capable of. And I knew when my dad was angry or what he didn't like, my dad didn't have the rationale, didn't have the intellect, didn't have the wherewithal to take a step back. He responded with anger and abuse and violence. That's what he did. And when my mom told me that she was going to leave my father, um, I made sure that like we had everything set up. We found a shelter where my mom, me, and my sisters seeked refuge, and we kind of let it. We didn't know what we were going to do, but I remember fearing for my life and fearing that my dad was going to take out his anger on his wife, my mom, and take it out on us. And when I found out my mom was going to serve the papers to my dad, I went to the police liaison at my middle school, James Madison Middle School, representing in Appleton, Wisconsin. And I went to the police liaison, and I asked him if I could talk to him about um, maybe bringing a cop car or having someone check on my father. But at the same time, I also wanted to make sure that like we knew where he was. Again, my father was a rattlesnake. You just never knew what was going to happen, and that's the reason why we're estranged right now. Is that he's been in and out of prison. Society failed him, and doesn't give him an excuse for his behavior. But um, in order to be safe and take care of my family, I had to cut my ties with my father, and almost not witness protection, but like, which is weird because I'm in the spotlight with the Bucks or anything like that. But we have restraining orders and everything in place um, because he's dangerous. Unfortunately, that's my father. In eighth grade, when I told the police liaison what my father was capable of, but I also told my father that, or told the police liaison that my father had talked about killing himself. And maybe that's where it comes from. Like, my chemistry, my genetic makeup, my brain chemistry, maybe that's where I get it from. I don't know. And they said, we'll see what we can do. And sure enough, later that night, we had cops, like we told the police officers where we were going to be. And cops came later that night and said, you were right. And it wasn't something that I wanted to be right. But I remember my heart dropping and I thought, oh my God, he killed himself. And the police officer said, you were right. He was going to kill himself, and we thwarted it. We were able to find him, and he's in jail right now. And what they told me was that my father got wasted, and he started his car in the garage, and went to the car and had like this vacuum cleaner hose into his rolled down his window, rolled up his window, and so his goal was to get wasted and then pass out and then eventually die. He forgot his suicide note. So he went back into the house, and as he was coming out, there were police officers there. And he ran away, and police officers were able to apprehend him. He ended up assaulting a police officer and was arrested. And he ended up living. And I've carried that weight on my shoulders of one, I don't know, being savvy enough to know that he was going to do that, but two, saving his life, but three, this burden that I have that I've been dealing with is that he's terrorized people moving forward. He had charges dropped of attempted murder in Boston. He tried to kill his fiance, and I don't know, charges were dropped, but he's been wanted with police for assaulting his girlfriends. He's had numerous ones. He's kidnapped them and kept them captive. And again, that's the thing that I have to accept, that that's my father. And I also have to accept the fact that I saved his life, because if it wasn't for me, cops would have never came to his house and he probably would have ended up dying. And that's kind of the burden that I carry, is that I carry that burden with me, of the fact that this is my father, and he continues to terrorize people. And the one thing, though, is that he's done terrorizing my family. He's done terrorizing me. And it goes back to that acceptance. I've accepted the fact that I did something good-natured. I did something ethical. I looked out for someone that I'm here because of him. And I can accept how I can play with the cards that are dealt. And so I know I wrapping up on kind of a heavy note, and I promise moving forward. But again, I come from a very dark, disturbing upbringing, and I want to be more honest and open with people, and I hope it helps. Hope it helps others. And again, I just kind of granted Jordan Love and his father, that like dynamic is completely different than mine, but knowing that he went through his father suicide and how he has to carry that, and I'm sure his father, like knowing that he wants his father to watch him play. It's another reason why I'm just rooting for him. I'm just hoping that we all get a chance to see him shine. Just someone that we can rally around. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Like I said, it'll be available on wherever you listen to podcasts. I'll have the ASL interpreted version on YouTube, and every week moving forward, we'll see. We'll do a YouTube live, and then the episode will be available wherever you listen to podcasts. And when I mention you will see, is that just because when you deal with all that trauma, and then you've accepted it, there are days where I just don't want to do things. But this feels good. This feels great to chat about. It feels very cathartic. This was the reason why I wanted to come back and clear the air. This is how I want the podcast to be, is hopefully it helps other people moving forward. And at the same time, it's like talk therapy for me. I can get it out as well and process it. It's not as heavy as a burden. So for everyone that tuned into the YouTube live, thank you so much. For everyone that continues to support, send messages, I hear you and I see you. It means so much. I do want to say Jacob Westendorf, friend of the podcast, he was one person that reached out to me to check in. His messages meant so much, and I know that he's dealing with a loss in his family right now. I'm not a religious person, but I'm keeping him and his family in my thoughts. And for everyone else out there, I hope you can do the same for Jacob who is grieving right now, dealing with some tragedy in his family. Jacob, if you're listening to this, we got your back, brother. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me. And I know I sent you a message as well, but I wanted to give you a shout out as well, as that we're stronger together. It takes a village. But with that said, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's Unknown Packers podcast. I'm Brice Christensen. Until next time.